I think that music, as I mentioned earlier, is probably the first and best therapeutic intervention. And I think that it not only allows us to access deep emotion, to experience deep emotion, to hold deep emotion, to transform emotion, but that it also, at its core, brings us closer to understanding what it is to be human.
You're listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, brought to you by University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. In this series, we'll explore a variety of well-being topics with experts from the university community in physical, emotional, nutritional, and financial health. Join us, and together we'll discover how we can thrive at work, home, and beyond. Welcome to another installment of Becoming Wildly Resilient. I'm your host, Jakob Hester. My guest today is Eric Wilkinson. Eric is a mental health clinician with UK HR Work Life and a part-time instructor in the College of Social Work. Today, Eric and I will be discussing the impact music can have on our well-being. Glad to have you on the show, Eric.
It's great to be here, Jacob.
How are you doing?
Doing pretty good today. I'm admiring the sun coming in through the window, and it's a pretty nice, beautiful day.
What is one way you've been taking care of yourself during the pandemic?
I was thinking of that the other day because we've been in the pandemic so long now. So I feel like there's been different stages of experimentation. What's been most consistent is time outdoors. For me, one of the most difficult aspects, as I think for a lot of people, is the restriction on our movement and not being able to visit friends and family. And so I've really compensated for that by going out and doing extensive walking and exploring within neighborhoods and within community parks, but then also spending some time with some of the surrounding smaller towns and just really tapping into my exploratory nature.
Having the sunshine and getting outdoors is really, really helpful for our well-being. So I appreciate you sharing that. So tell the listeners a little more about yourself as a person and the work that you do.
So I am one of the mental health clinicians in the Office of Work Life. I've been involved with behavioral health. It's going on 19 years now, and I've been a therapist for about 12 or 13 years. Since a very young age, I've always been really interested in art and writing and music. And so that in combination with mindfulness, which I feel like art and music are inherently mindfulness practices, those interests really animate my clinical work. So it informs my clinical work, and it's also one of the areas where I seek new opportunities to help clients grow and reconnect with some of the internal resources, some of the personal strengths that many of us use during difficult times, but are not always consciously aware of, hey, this is a good time for me to journal, or this is a good time for me to pick up my guitar, or spend some time with one of my favorite films.
We both share an interest in vinyl records. That was something that we learned kind of early on in the pandemic, I think it was. And that, for me, I've mentioned in a past episode, was a hobby that kind of turned into a self-care strategy. So I think you're the right person to have on this. And this is an episode that's sort of been in the works for a while. So I'm glad to finally be able to get to this topic and talk about music and some of the many benefits that come out of it. So what role has music played in your life?
My earliest memories, I think probably for like many people, are connected to music. I can remember visiting my grandmother in Illinois, and I had to be under the age of 3 for sure. I was probably under the age of 2. And I remember my grandmother rocking me to sleep and singing me a lullaby. What was so pronounced in the memory is that I can remember looking at the shadows in the room where she was rocking me. And I can still remember, I don't remember any of the words. And I imagine I didn't have a lot of words at that point in my life. But I can remember how the shadows in the room were scary. They were threatening. And at the same time, her voice was so calming and soothing, and this the power of music to soothe and to calm, even in the presence of something that is foreign or unfamiliar or scary. That memory stayed with me, and I often thought about how that is one of the things that has always driven my interest in art is wanting to build relationship with that which frightens me. And I trace that back to that early memory. But those early childhood experiences, I think, just, I continued even as a young child to be really immersed in records and music, listening to music, making up my own songs. So for me, it goes all the way back to being a toddler, and my passion continues to this day.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting to me how music is tied to these memories that we have or to these feelings that we had, and how it can stick with you for that amount of time and how it sort of clings to it. And I think we'll probably dive into that a little bit, but I share kind of similar experiences of like my memories of music. And there's just countless times where I've like either leaned on music or they were just such a part of my life, and they have continued to be a part of my life to this point. So that's why I'm really interested in this topic and sort of learning more about it and some of the whys behind it as well. Mm-hmm. So on the show, we often talk about feelings and emotions, and Amy Rodquist-Cadet and I did a deep dive on those a couple episodes ago. So I kind of want to start off just tying those together. So how is music tied to the feelings and emotions that we experience?
It's a great question. I right now I have a niece who's about 2 years old. And one of the things that we do is my mom and I will essentially FaceTime with her, get on a portal, and she will select songs. My sister in Chicago will play songs, and then my niece, she will jump up and down on the trampoline and dance to the music. And there's just such pure joy, like absolute pure joy in emotion. So I think back to those very, very beginning of being a human being. What's really fascinating about music is it's one of those things where when we're listening to music, there is direct neural firing in our brain, so that our brain is syncing up with the music. When you think about music and about what it means to be human, there's no known human culture or society across time where music was not present. And so it's extremely universal. It's also believed that music likely existed before language. And so we know that, to your question of, how does it connect to feeling and emotion? When we listen to music, it activates all regions of our brain, but it in particular activates emotional regions of our brain in a way that exists outside of language.
Yeah, that was really interesting. So I mentioned Headspace in a previous episode as well, and they've got a new series out with the musician John Legend, and it's called Music on My Mind, and it actually just premiered right before we started recording. And in the first episode of that, they actually hooked him up and watched his brainwaves as he went through kind of 3 different like pieces of music. And one was like a piece of his with the music video right after he got married. And then they played like a Nina Simone song. And then it was just like a video, which is some calming music and fish swimming around. And they looked at the differences between each of those and how his brain was activated when watching those. And it was really interesting to hear sort of the neurological side of that. And he even talked about the same thing because he's known for writing so many like love ballads and those types of things that are supposed to be pieces of music that do connect with you emotionally. So for him to see the brain side of it too was really fascinating. And it was, I think, a lot of kind of what you were talking about there and how your brain is responding to the music that you're listening to.
Yeah, absolutely. All regions of the brain are activated when people listen to music, but 2 regions that kind of stand out from an emotional standpoint are the amygdala and the limbic system. When the amygdala, of course, is where the fight or flight response derives from, but the amygdala is the house of all of emotion, and there's a lot of activity within the amygdala when people listen to music. But I'm a clinical social worker, and I've used music and clinical practice for almost 20 years, and going through some of the literature on the neuroscience was interesting. Is that the cerebellum is also involved, and the cerebellum is in the brain stem, which is the reptilian brain. And if you think about it, the brain stem is really based in our survival about being able to identify threat or opportunity within our environment. And so it's completely not engaged with language at all. And when we feel powerful emotion, it leads us to want to take action, which is, again, from an evolutionary standpoint, makes sense. It helps with our survival. But that the fear and the pleasure that is experienced through the brainstem, this again is activated by music in really the oldest, most primitive region of our brain.
Yeah, I think when I think about the emotional connection as well, I think about like movies and TV and how music are used in those. And a good chunk of the time, like a score, for example, is not using lyrics. They're just setting the tone. Mm-hmm. So whether it's something like Jaws, which is one of those classic pieces of music that elicits this sort of fear in you as the sharks are arriving, there's probably not a person in the world who doesn't know the ba-na, like those types of things really stick with you. And so it's interesting to think about music in sort of these two different ways, and how it is interacting with your brain and the different parts, and which parts are interacting with the others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would be remiss if I didn't point out that the vocals, the quality of the vocals, the pitch and the tone, that this also evokes emotion. So outside of what the actual linguistic content is communicating, there are just certain voices that we find appealing or pleasurable, and that so much emotion is also conveyed through vocals, of course, that's independent of the specific words that are being spoken.
Yeah, actually, I have a funny example. I was watching, it was like a YouTube comedian type of thing this morning, and they actually took Billie Eilish's Bad Guy, but did it in like the style of Meghan Trainor. So it was like much more like up tempo and like bright and poppy, but taking a song like Bad Guy, which is kind of like dark, and the lyrical content is a little bit dark as well. And it was like, it's basically to that point, like it completely changes how you perceive that song when you're hearing it with sort of a poppier, bright backbeat going with it.
Yeah. And you just spoke to one of the other kind of neurological underpinnings that makes music interesting, is that this game that songwriters and composers play, where they know that we know what are the cultural expectations for a particular piece of music, and when they surprise us, our brain experiences that as usually as or often as pleasurable and exciting. And so that excitement that you were just articulating, of something being experienced in a new and unpredictable way that doesn't conform with expectations, this is part of the game of music.
And I think you might have alluded to this a little bit already as well, but the subjectivity of the experience and your connection with a piece of music is very different from person to person as well.
Yes. I'm someone who's worked at this time and at this point in my clinical career, I've worked with thousands of different clients, and I've used music with so many of them. And there is no consensus on what's good music, or no consensus on what a certain song means. It really is an individualized experience that is connected to a larger culture. We do learn expectations about what music is and is not. We learn expectations about different genres and different styles. Many people, myself included, sometimes can feel uncomfortable when an artist diverges in a significant way from their traditional style. There is a lot of cultural musical grammar that we internalize. But depending on our biography, when we grew up, what type of music we are exposed to, our default or most frequently experienced emotional states, our friend group, our family group, all these things contribute to really individualized preferences in music.
Yeah. So kind of thinking more broadly, what are some of the sort of generalized benefits music can provide for our mental and emotional well-being?
When I think about the benefits, again, I'm very aware of how music can elicit such a range of emotional experience, and so that is the power of music. I think that when we think about the benefits of music, if you think about human activity and the events that we value most, things like birthdays and weddings, funerals, romantic evenings, holidays, religious ceremonies, even what I was talking about earlier, the how we soothe a baby when a baby is crying. If you think about the most important events for most humans, as well as times when we're experiencing emotional difficulty, music is almost always present or is accessed to help us to enhance the experience, to contextualize the experience, to help us move through the experience. And so I think that music is the, I'm biased. I wouldn't be on this podcast talking about this subject if I wasn't extremely biased towards music. But I feel like music is the most therapeutic intervention that is available to us. And so both playing and listening to music, it allows us to relate to our experience and to our emotions in a way that transforms the experience.
Something interesting that I discovered recently that I don't know that I ever really put the connection together, but Apollo, the Greek god, was actually the god of music and of healing. And so when I sort of put that together, I was like, that's so brilliant that you talked about the universality and how music has been across all these cultures and civilizations pretty much since the beginning of time, and possibly even predated actual language and speech. And so to think about an ancient culture like that, to put the status of music and healing on the same God was really interesting and fascinating to me. And I think is sort of the root of this episode too, in some way.
Wonderful point. And I think that when we explore music, we are exploring human nature, kind of from a global perspective, but then also from a very intimate perspective of who is it to be me? What is it to be human? What is this experience that I'm having? So music really is a direct connection to human nature, and I think that's why it gets elevated to the level of godliness.
So what can music tell us about ourselves? Basically, what you listen to, what does that tell you about yourself?
So that's a big question there, because one of the things about it is that we know that there tends to be some human development, child development trends pretty consistent with music. Children coming into the world interested and able to enjoy music. One of the experiments that it was widely reported in the media about a decade ago, I believe, was when they would play different music to babies in utero, a particular song in a specific genre, and then they would not play that song again for the baby's first year of life. But then when they played the song, there was a strong preference for the music that they had heard. So we know that even in utero, we're already starting to develop musical preferences. We know that around the age of 8 to 10 for most children, again, I feel like I probably am an outlier in this regard, but around the age of 8 to 10 is when most children really start to become interested in music. And we know that the musical brain, the parts of the brain that are really able to fully process and experience music tends to mature around age 14. And so we know that music when we're age 14 that we're listening to has particular strong resonance throughout our life. And we know that there's that general trend that throughout adolescence, there's a lot of exploration with music. And then a fair amount, a large amount of people really become less experimental, less into exploration as they move into their 20s, into adulthood. So we know that childhood, and then particularly between the age of 8 and 20, are really impactful in terms of our musical preferences. But there are plenty of adults who continue to engage new forms of music throughout their life and stay curious. And also I think about how different times in our life or different events in our life, when we're going through some kind of major change, major transition, one of the things that our mind tries to seek out is a roadmap or a way of making sense of our experience. And so during crises, this is a time where not only does music become more salient and more important to us, but it's also a time where I think that we're open to listening to new music in a way that can address our needs. So I think that the foundation for, preference in music and the type of music we listen to, I think is very cultural, and I think it's very consistent with human and child development. But I also think that life transitions, life events, one's intellectual and creative curiosity can facilitate an openness throughout our lives.
Have you ever had one of those experiences where you've soundtracked your life, where you're going through a specific something, whatever that may be, whether it's positive, whether it's negative, and you sort of play this music in the back of your head, or you think of a popular piece of music that sort of fits in the timeline of your life at that moment?
Absolutely. And I think that one of the things that we know is that when we listen to certain music that's really specific to time, a specific period in our life, the association with memory is really strong. So we can hear a song that maybe we haven't heard for 20 years. And when we hear that song, it opens up the door to all these kind of unconscious memories from that time period. So I think that not only can we soundtrack our life based on music, but I also think that we can access memory through music. Now, if you continue to listen to music, let's say you're a big Pink Floyd fan, for example.
I am.
I was trying to think intuitively what's some music Jacob might like, and if you're a big Pink Floyd fan, you probably from being a teenager to through adulthood, you're probably still listening to Pink Floyd. So you're not going to be able to use it as a cue for specific memories in the same way as if you once listened to Paula Abdul or Vanilla Ice, which was probably a time limited experience.
What about negative effects or sort of possible unintended consequences with music and sort of your mental and emotional well-being?
So I do believe that there's such thing as too much music. I think if we overindulge in music, I think that a lot of the and this kind of aligns with some of the research around happiness, that when we discover things that bring us pleasure, kind of spreading out the pleasurable activities actually enhances the pleasure, so that there's more of a dopamine spike. It's more enjoyable when something is a treat as opposed to when we get it every day. And so based on your question, one of the things that can undermine, the power of music is if we listen to it too much, if we overuse it. So that there's, David Byrne talks about that there's real value in the gaps between music, the gaps between playing or experiencing music are almost or maybe as important as the times when we're actively listening to music or playing music. So overuse is one of the, what I'd say, a negative downside to it. From a mood standpoint, many people like to match up the music they're listening to with their mood. And that can actually be very therapeutic. Uh, but I'm not a certified music therapist. I use music with my clients, but I have looked at some of and been in some trainings with musical therapists. Often there's this emphasis on connecting to what you're feeling by playing music that resonates with you. But then also, particularly when you're in a dark place, if you're feeling really depressed or really angry or really hurt, then also imagining music that connects with how you want to feel so you don't stay stuck in that place. So I think sometimes there can be some risk if you only listen to music that really connects with difficult emotion. There are some risks that you could actually intensify that emotion. Having said that, I feel like most people are pretty intuitive about these things. So if they're listening to music and it's no longer making them feel better, most people are going to stop listening to the music. So I don't think it's a significant risk, but I do think it exists. Other thoughts about unintended consequences. Music can be used for really classifying people as whether they're in the in group or out group. So certainly music can become a source of discrimination or a source of judging others. And I think in those situations, classifying somebody else based on the music they listen to as the other or is not like me, that's a negative unintended consequence that sometimes arises. Oh, one other thing is we know that music can be used to manipulate. Music can be used to advance social injustice and racism and nationalism, xenophobia. So those are also additional negative unintended consequences, I would say.
Yeah, to that last point, I was actually thinking about the flip side about how those can enhance those causes as well. The more positive social causes that we may be looking towards. And I think of something like the blues, for example, and it was born out of that struggle and how you're really resonating with someone else's experience, though you may never have been in their shoes. It kind of brings up this idea of empathy and putting yourself in their position, because you may never feel that, but it at least gives you this snapshot or kind of just a brief moment to be transported somewhere else. And I think that sort of leads into what I want to talk about next, which is connection, because that is such a key component of the human experience and our overall well-being. So I'm curious how music and connection are linked. So what are some ways that we can foster connection via music?
Yeah, and what you just said about the empathy piece, I think, is a wonderful point. Music can enhance empathy and compassion. It really can let us not only feel what somebody else is feeling, but want to feel motivated to alleviate suffering from others. I know, I saw a breakdancing movie when I was 8 or 9, and then I fell in love with hip hop, and that opened up me to reading all kinds of literature like James Baldwin and Eldridge Cleaver, and really questioning white male privilege, and so the capacity to connect with people whose experiences are different than yours is one of the amazing aspects of music. And when we start to think about higher ideals of social justice or ideals of compassion or love or peace, again, it can be powerful in terms of letting us understand in a really primal way what other people are experiencing. As far as like the connection aspect, I think, a huge part of our identity is linked to the music that we listen to, and that can be the source of community. I mean, it often is a source of community. I think that playing music with others, celebrating music with others brings people together. I've mentioned multiple times my love of 80s and 90s hip hop, so I would be remiss if I didn't quote Run DMC, who said, music ain't nothing but the people's jam, this idea of coming together. And, one of the things we haven't talked about to this point is in most culture, music and dance are almost seen as the same thing, because we understand that one of the regions of the brain that's processes the cerebellum is, of course, involved with timing and movement. And we know that wherever there is music, there is usually dance, or the impulse for dance, the impulse for movement. And so in thinking about that, there's whole communities, built around dance and movement. So I think that, again, when I think about, like, when you explore music, you're exploring human nature. And so you are, in a really fundamental way, getting down to the core of what makes us human. The beat writer Jack Kerouac, he had a quote where he says, "Music is the only truth." And I feel like that the universality of music, the fact that music connects with human emotions, that people across time and culture, race, ethnicity, gender, sexuality, class, it is really a unifying truth that can bring us together.
And there's so many opportunities for that to happen. You mentioned a couple of them, whether it's listening to and kind of getting that empathy on somebody else's experience, or it's playing music together. And so you're physically, connected there at the time. And I think it's really interesting to me to think about, like, especially kind of these freer forms of music, and improvisational music, particularly, and thinking about, like, some of the great, like, jazz, quintets or quartets or trios or whatever, and how they just explored music together on stage in a live format is just so fascinating to me, that these, like, 3, 4, 5 individuals can be in such synchronicity with each other in that moment, to be able to string together a 14-minute song, and you go back and listen to them to this day, and they're still universal, and they still are great pieces of music in there. It's really crazy to me to think about how people are able to do that. But it is a moment to connect not only them and sort of their microcosm as the musicians, but that crowd as well. And you're talking again, sort of talking about connecting with others in maybe a live scenario, or whether you're watching a live, concert on YouTube. And so that's something that's been really interesting to me to learn about over the years and to dive deeper in. And I think you hit the nail on the head when it is that human nature. And music is human nature. So it provides us plenty of opportunities to look inward with ourselves, but to also look outward and connect with others.
You're absolutely right. And you made what you just mentioned made me think of during the pandemic, where there's been a lot of social isolation. I think the importance of music has only intensified. I think about how TikTok was popular before the pandemic, but TikTok's really taken off. For the record, I don't use TikTok because I'm not a big social media fan. But to the extent that I've had exposure with TikTok, without music, there is no TikTok, right? I mean, TikTok is really about, so much of the content is about how people are responding, interpreting, expressing, relating to music. And so I absolutely agree that this is one of the things that is available to us when we're feeling alone or isolated. And it can be expressed in so many different ways. The other thing that, Jacob, you just mentioned that made me think of is the improvisational style of jazz musicians, or really any musicians that come together and play. One of the unfortunate developments in Western culture is that there's been this hierarchy that's been created between experts and consumers of music. And it's really a modern development. For most of the existence of human beings, everybody sang and played music. It was a communal thing. It was not something reserved for experts, where the rest of us just consume it in a passive way. And I think that the more that we can embrace or encourage or support the communal nature of music, that this is something that everybody can do. You don't have to be an expert to play music or play an instrument, or to sing a song, or to sing songs with others. Every mother of a newborn baby, whether she feels competent as a singer or not, almost universally sings to her child. And I think trying to take that understanding that ethos of this is fundamental to being human, and really encouraging people to question this power dynamic of expert performer and passive listener. I think that there's a lot of liberation potential in kind of deconstructing that power structure.
Yeah, I think about how, like, do you have to be good at music to get the enjoyment out of it? And I think, to me, the answer is no. I mean, I like have a cajon, I have a couple of guitars, I really want a ukulele, I have a harmonica, like I have lots of random instruments, and I'm not good at a single one of them. But there's times where I just love to pick them up, and it's something different. It makes my brain work differently, and it shuts down some other thoughts or something like that. And so I think that's kind of the point you're alluding to, that you don't have to be good at music to get the value out of music. So if you're just tapping on your desk or on the steering wheel, there's probably some value out of that. You're not in a studio recording music, and you're not a professional musician, but you're still getting and reaping some of the benefits of music in general.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think most of us hopefully have the wonderful experience of singing in our shower and or throwing dance parties in your house. And so the more I think that we let go of this belief that you have to be, technically accomplished or good to play music or create music, I think the more we can let go of that belief, the better it is for all of our wellness and mental health.
So what are some ways that individuals can use music as a tool for increasing resilience?
So when I always come back to that, music is really about this exploration of human nature. And so I think that when we conceptualize or talk about resilience, a lot of times people just talk about it as, can you manage stress? Can you tolerate stress? And I think obviously that's a component of resilience. And we know that there's research that shows that if you listen to calming music, and again, what's calming to one person may be different than what's calming to someone else. But generally, if you listen to quieter music, slower tempo in the music, not a lot of surprises, maybe some simple melodies, that this tends to be calming to our nervous system. I mean, that's one way to deal with stress, but I think that only is only a surface level. I think that when we really engage with the full range of emotion that music can evoke, it's a safe way for us to experiment with feeling different things. And the more practice we have feeling a range of emotion, intensity and emotion, the more practice we have with emotion, the more that we are able to hold difficult emotion when it arises. And so I really look at music as not only a resource to us when we're going through a difficult time, something that we can do to feel better, but I actually look at it as a way of building resilience, of learning to connect with a wide range of emotion, to hold emotion. And so that when an emotion arises within us that might feel threatening or foreign, that we can say, that we know intuitively that I can experience this, I can be present with it, I can engage with it, and I can let this emotion resolve or transform or move through me. And that's one of the functions of music, is taking difficult emotion and transforming it into something else.
Yeah, something that you and I have talked about, this was months ago now, was actually about playing music on a record player, sort of that tactile experience with it as well. And it forces you to be present in the moment, because you have to physically get up, you have to go turn that record over, you have to drop the needle or at least turn it on, depending on what kind of model you have. And so there's more steps to it, and it starts to become a practice in mindfulness in its own right. And I think that's a reason for me that it became this coping strategy in the early parts of the pandemic, particularly because it was something that made me have to be present. And then once once that needle dropped on the record and the music started, I'm transported somewhere else for a brief moment in time. And I'm getting a chance to, depending on what record I put on, I'm maybe following a story, or I'm experiencing deep emotion, maybe it's sadness or whether it's joy or something like that. And so there's ways to make these sort of everyday common things that are around us all of the time into these practices that we can use to our benefit as well, particularly when we're talking about something like resilience.
Yes, absolutely. When we had that conversation, you brought up the tactile. It was interesting to me because when I listen to vinyl, one of the things I love about it is the visual artwork in the album. It's the imperfections in the vinyl, the fact that you do hear, especially in old vinyl, that popping sound, the fact that you do have to turn the record over. You had mentioned to me the tactile experience, and you're absolutely right about that. And that was just by bringing it to my awareness, I then started to experience vinyl in a fuller way. This is mindfulness practice of engaging all of your senses really enhances life. It really provides texture and depth to experience. That's really true. But it also, Jacob, when you shared that with me, because that was not something that I was really consciously aware of, it also speaks to the fact that even something that you feel like you're really engaged with, that there is always new ways of relating to the same experience, particularly when it comes to the experience of music.
Yeah, I think a lot of that is lost with how streaming is so ubiquitous with music now and how that changed music. It's sometimes actually it's overwhelming for me to hop on to, say, Spotify or any other sort of similar service. We have all of this music at our fingertips now, but it's also overwhelming because there are so many choices. So that's why I love having the ability. It's like I have a finite number of records that grows weekly generally, but knowing that I have them right there and I have this sort of finite selection that I can go through and I can thumb through those sleeves and pick out the one that I want kind of based on how I'm feeling in that moment. And I think that gets, like I said, it gets lost a little bit with some of the streaming. So you could do the same thing with CDs as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that a benefit that also to the vinyl is not only all the sensory experiences we were just talking about, but you can't, the moment a song either bugs you or bores you, you can't just immediately skip to the next song. And so if you're going to really engage with the music, it requires this nuanced range of experience where it's not just about, let me get the most pleasure I can within this short period of time. In many ways, analog music, it gives us that joy of the anticipated pleasure, so that if we put a record on, we can't just skip to the one. I mean, we can, you can go, and it just requires more work, which tends to be a barrier for most of us. But the idea that you know that there's a song later in the album that you're looking forward to hearing, and the anticipatory excitement actually is part of the joy of listening to vinyl records.
Yeah, that's something interesting that I had not considered previously either. And I think you can do that with digital music as well. You just have to be that much more conscious about it, I think. You have to make yourself sit down and think about that and make it a practice rather than just this passive experience or this like background music or anything like that. And actually using it as a tool for resilience or for whatever you're trying to use it for even.
You're right. You can do that intentionally with digital music. But the other thing I think that's a real benefit to albums is that there are recurrent themes that arise within the album that you can experience the album as a complete whole. Whereas when we download music or we listen to MP3s, we tend to listen to songs in isolation. And so I think that loses some of the artistic value is diminished. A great song is a great song, whether you listen to it digitally or on vinyl. But the idea of listening to an album where the songs refer or infer or relate to each other, connect to each other in some way, is also, I think, a different type of cultural product.
Yeah, and I think that gives you another opportunity to really connect with the artist and what they were thinking at that point in time when they wrote and recorded that song, what was going sort of through their mind, and what they're sharing with you. So it gives you that chance for connection. And so I think that actually kind of ties into something fun that we wanted to do for this episode, and give you a chance to connect with us. We created a resilience playlist. So it got some of our favorite songs, and we each picked 7 songs related to resilience in some way. And we combined them into one playlist that we're putting on Spotify and we'll share in the show notes. So Eric, I'll have you kind of briefly talk about the songs that you selected first.
Sure. And I'm going to cheat a little bit because I'm going to tell you the songs I chose and why, but then I'm also going to give you 2 alternatives. So the first song is A Change Is Going to Come by Sam Cooke. And when I think about that song, it's an amazing song about struggle with racism and social injustice in the 60s, but also just the way the song builds. Again, I'm very lyrical, so some of the lyrics at the end of the song about reaching out to his brother and this resilience, this continued striving to hope beyond hope, to believe when there's little reason to believe. I think that's a powerful song. So that's the opening song. The second song I chose is Hold On to Your Genre by Les 75. And I like it because of its resistance, its kind of post-punk. I like the title in the sense of, I thought connected to our podcast topic for today, that part of what we see as our core identity and coming back home is the genre of music, but it also speaks to the dark aspects of being human, kind of what I would describe as the vampire tendencies of being human, whether it's addiction or insecurity or vulnerability or desire for power or status. Those themes are explored in that song, with the conclusion of, are you sick of being pretty? Are you sick of being cool? Which I thought was, for me, it connects. Third song I chose is Bruce Springsteen's Atlantic City. And I love this song because a lot of songs I chose, and music I listen to in general, often in some way create tension through description of personal struggle. And so Atlantic City, for those unfamiliar, very much about someone who's down on their luck, works hard, but, is working class, feeling pretty desperate. There's an impulse to let me take my savings and go gamble in hopes that I can get out of this stifling debt. And when that doesn't happen, there's an awareness in the last verse that he's going to do a job for someone. And essentially he's compromising ethics, probably to do some kind of legal activity just to survive, which people within our society and our world constantly are often in this position of, how do I survive? But what I really love about that song is the chorus, the idea that of maybe everything that dies someday comes back, this idea of that death and birth is eternal. The fourth song is, I ended up going with the Beastie Boys, their Open Letter to NYC, which was on an album that was released not too long after 9/11. What I really love about this song is just the humanity that just saturates that song. The chorus on that song emphasizes, Black, white, Asian, Middle Eastern, and Latin, this love of all people and what makes New York so diverse and so beautiful. And I selected that song because I was thinking about how, once again, during the pandemic, of course, New York is one of the hardest hit cities where we've seen a lot of suffering. The alternative that I was tempted to go with on that one was Run the Jewels. And they have a song, I think it's titled Last Word to the Firing Squad, which is really an amazing song. I would encourage folks to listen to. After that, I have PJ Harvey, and her song is We Float. And this song, what I like about it is, again, there's this personal narrative of getting lost in pursuit of excess or kind of the temptations of the night. I would describe it as chasing dopamine. And the chorus is, we float. we take life as it comes. So this idea that we can go through a really difficult time in our life, and often we create personal narratives that are highly critical of ourselves, but being able to step outside that and kind of float outside of our suffering to appreciate the beauty of the world and the beauty of life, and not get so immersed in our own self-destructive narrative. After that, I may mispronounce her name, but it's Sybil Bayer, and the song is called The End. Essentially, this song was recorded somewhere between 1970 and 73, and the woman's son later passed on the old recording to one of the band members in Dinosaur Jr. in 2006, and then it was released almost, approximately 35 to 38 years after it was written. And so I love it because of how it's so minimalist. It's just guitar and it's just the pain, ostensibly about the end of a relationship, but also this acceptance of the end. She sings, "This is the end, my friend of mine, sweet friend of mine." And there's just such loneliness in her voice and sadness. I think it's something that we can, again, recognize that we all experience deep loss at times in our lives, but also being able to stay open to it and see the beauty in even our worst moments. And then finally, I conclude with Nina Simone's "Ain't Got No, I Got Life," which is just one of my favorite songs that exists. And the tension that builds throughout the song and the piano playing focuses on really being down and out and really feeling like you have nothing. And then the redemption or in the song is this connection to, I have eyes, I have ears, I have a body, I got life, which climaxes with this, I have my freedom. And so that even when we are kind of in our lowest moments and we feel most alone in our deepest levels of despair, that we still have the power to act and to affirm that I have life and that is everything. So those are songs I chose. Probably wasn't as concise with my description as I aspired to be, but that's my list.
Yeah, that's a really eclectic list, and I'm really glad that you added Sam Cooke and Nina Simone on there because they were on my short list, but I had to cut them to make it 7. So I feel redemption on cutting them. But starting off the top of my playlist, actually in sort of no particular order, I think I may rearrange them on the actual playlist, but the Beatles' "Let It Be," probably one of my favorite songs of all time. It's really simple, but to me, there's so much beauty in that simpleness of it. And it's really, I take out of it finding light in the darkness and managing what is in your control. So it has a really big resilience vibe to me. The second song I had is the Grateful Dead's "Ripple." Another song that's really beautiful and brilliant, both musically and lyrically, because it's blending Eastern and Western philosophies with this folk sound. And it's not the same type of song that people think of when you think of the Grateful Dead. But if you asked any sort of Deadhead, it's probably in their top 5. And the lyrics are really open to interpretation and can change over time, sort of how you're feeling. But what stands out to me in that song is the importance of music and then the individual journeys that we each have to walk. So the narrator is offering up some wisdom and some help and some well wishes in the moment. But at the end, they kind of conclude with ultimately not being able to give us or show us, the listener, the way, because that is our path. So we may have these points in time where we lean on other people, but ultimately it's up to us on how we move forward in the paths that we choose. And so it's a very sort of insightful and really thought-provoking song to me. My third one is Bob Marley's "Wake Up and Live." So this one is a little more of a deep cut. I think people would have typically trended towards something like "Three Little Birds." But this was actually, part of this was my senior quote in high school as well. So I'll just read that and let it do the talking. So, "Life is one big road with lots of signs. So when you're riding through the ruts, don't complicate your mind. Flee from hate, mischief, and jealousy. Don't bury your thoughts. Put your vision to reality." My fourth song, it's interesting that you brought up the in utero music. because Stevie Wonder was what my parents have often told me that they'd put like headphones on my mom's stomach, and that was what was played. So I chose Stevie Wonder's Higher Ground. To me, it's a song about redemption and perseverance, and it has a lot of spiritual undertones to it, or maybe even overtones, but it really allows you to assign what that higher ground is to you. And so you can connect to that piece of music. And so I find it always interesting, and it's a really fun song as well. Next, I have Bill Withers' Lean on Me. Another one that it's kind of a no-brainer, another sort of brilliant artist. And the song to me acknowledges that inevitability of struggle, but also how we need each other. And he acknowledges that he's here to help you because there may come a day when he needs it, and that day will likely come. And so that hope and that vulnerability are really powerful to me in that song. Next, I've got Elton John's I'm Still Standing. So if you look at the lyrics, it's classically a song about getting over a breakup. But since that time, it has really resonated with listeners as a song about resilience. So I just really love the song, and it's a really fun music video as well. So had to throw that one on there. And then I close with Louis Armstrong's What a Wonderful World. Again, such a beautiful song. My wife and I actually had our first dance at the wedding to Louis Armstrong. It was La Vie en Rosa, but I wanted to get Louis Armstrong on here in this song particularly because I think it embodies that mindful presence with the world around you and sort of looking for the good even in those darker times as well. So it kind of ties it right back to that first one with Let It Be, with looking for the light in the darkness. So yeah, that's my 7.
Pretty great that your parents played Stevie Wonder for you when you were in utero. That's wonderful.
So besides the awesome playlist that we've created, what are some of the books, podcasts, websites, or other self-guided resources on this topic that you'd recommend that may add more value to listeners' lives?
So regarding books that I would recommend, let me first say that there's some really great books out there specifically on music therapy and just on music as part of recovery or part of wellness. But the first book is something that I really used in a significant way during our podcast today with the neuroscience, is the book titled This Is Your Brain on Music. It's by Daniel Levitin, and it's a wonderful book. And the author, before he was a cognitive psychologist, he was an accomplished recording engineer out in the Bay Area, worked with a lot of famous musicians, and his work as a cognitive psychologist, cognitive neuroscientist, is that has really been focused on what music means to human beings and how we experience and process music. So that's a great book. And then the other book that I would recommend is a book by David Byrne, and that book is just simply titled How Music Works. And this book really gets into the political economy of music, the historical meaning of music cross-culturally, as well as the cultural significance of music today and ways that music can become democratized to empower particularly folks in Western culture to really reap the benefits of creating and experiencing music.
Awesome. So the final question that I have is, what's the main thing you hope listeners take away from this conversation? So it's kind of your take-home message.
Well, I don't think there's a wrong way to do music. I think that I would strongly encourage engagement with music and curiosity about different types of music, as well as your own willingness to play music or sing songs. I think that music, as I mentioned earlier, is probably the first and best therapeutic intervention. And I think that it not only allows us to access deep emotion, to experience deep emotion, to hold deep emotion, to transform emotion, but that it also, at its core, brings us closer to understanding what it is to be human.
I think that's great. I appreciate you coming on the show, and I appreciate you sharing all your knowledge. And it's a really fun topic for me because I know we're both really passionate about it. So thanks again for coming on and talking about music and some of the benefits.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
That's it for this episode of Becoming Wildly Resilient. However, the music doesn't stop here. Since music is a subjective experience, we want to know what songs you'd add to our playlist. Email us at healthandwellness@uky.edu to tell us your songs, and I may just add them to the playlist. If you want to learn more about this episode's topic from Eric, he'll be giving a presentation on music and the gift of presence on Monday, May 3rd at 1:30 p.m. This online presentation is part of the Work Life Rock series, which brings in guest speakers twice a month to share tips for managing challenges in everyday life through resilience, optimism, compassion, knowledge, and self-care. Also coming up are a couple of mindfulness opportunities brought to you by UK HR Health and Wellness. First, on Saturday, March 20th from 9 a.m. to 4 p.m., we'll have another mindfulness-based stress reduction retreat. This one-day online workshop will provide you with a toolkit to help you manage stress and learn relaxation techniques for a more positive, mindful life. These retreats are offered at a discounted rate of $25 to UK employees on a university-sponsored health plan. Additionally, health coach Jackie Carroll is offering a new KORU 2.0 class beginning Friday, April 9th at 11 a.m. This is an advanced course for individuals who have already completed the KORU Basic course. Like KORU Basic, it's a free 4-week course currently offered online. Finally, we have 2 ongoing programs and offerings still available. If you're a UK employee on a health plan who has claimed a CSA voucher but has not purchased your share yet, be sure to do it soon. You have until May 9th to purchase your share, but shares are limited and not guaranteed. As of this recording, 2 of our partner farms have almost sold out. For those who have not yet claimed a voucher but are still interested, you have until May 7th to claim your voucher. The well-being check-ins are also continuing for UK employees. Get a snapshot of your overall well-being and discuss what's next with one of these 20-minute virtual appointments. Each month, 8 participants from that month will be randomly chosen to win $200. You can learn more about all of these programs and events by visiting the links provided in the show notes. As always, take care of yourself and others, and stay well. Thanks for listening to Becoming Wildly Resilient, a podcast series from University of Kentucky Human Resources, Health and Wellness. The UK HR Health and Wellness team, consisting of certified health coaches, fitness experts, registered dietitians, and wellness specialists, offer a wide range of online and in-person programming to University of Kentucky employees, retirees, and their spouses. If you enjoyed this episode, you can listen and subscribe to future episodes wherever you find your podcasts. Connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram by searching @UKY Wellness. There, you'll find links to episode show notes and more. You can also email healthandwellness@uky.edu with any questions or suggestions for future episode topics. To learn more about well-being benefits offered by University of Kentucky Human Resources, visit www.uky.edu/HR/wellbeing. Live well.